We're going to talk tonight about data, and there you go. We got the data folks out tonight, and marketing, because it is Future M, as in the future of marketing. We've got really interesting and very highly select a couple of folks to help us think this through, and I want to introduce them before we get going. First of all, Chuck Hollis, who is a VP of Global Marketing CTO at EMC. Chuck's a 17-year EMC veteran, longtime member of EMC's management team, working on strategic aspects of marketing, business development, and technology. He's got a great blog, which is chucksblog.emc.com.
Very creatively named, right?
Very creatively named.
Yes.
That's got a real nice ring to it. And writes frequently about advanced IT leadership topics. Very interested especially in how IT groups are implementing data and analytics to sort of change the game, which is an awesome topic we're going to talk about today. And Tom Davenport, thank you, Tom, visiting professor at Harvard Business School. And Tom is a name familiar to many of us around analytics. Before it was big data, it was just analytics. So hopefully Tom's enjoying that wave.
Yeah, I told you so thing.
He's the President's Distinguished Professor in Management and Information Technology at Babson College, visiting Harvard for a year, even moved into Cambridge to prove that he's all in. And he's the Research Director and co-founder of the International Institute for Analytics. And by the way, what is that, Tom?
It's an international institute to study analytics, basically. No, it's it's kind of like a Gartner for analytics, I would say, with a lot of industry-specific research councils, healthcare, retail, banking, etc.
Cool. Well, Tom has written over 14 books, or 100 articles. When's the 15th coming out?
I'm up to 16, actually.
Oh, 16?
Yeah.
Okay, you've written 2 since the last update to your bio? Damn, you're fast.
Too busy writing books to update my bio, I guess.
It's like, how are you teaching, by the way? He helps organizations to revitalize their management practices in areas such as analytics, information and knowledge management, process management, and enterprise systems. So, thank you both for coming. We're lucky to have you both living in the area and also willing to join us at Future M. Future M is a great event, and it's growing in its size and import, hopefully. And we're also pleased to do this in Boston, where it's not necessarily the hub of marketing per se, but it is a hub of technology. And so we're really, I think, a really interesting intersection of the technology and the marketing. And I thought I would just kick us off on the marketing topic by showing some slides that sort of set the context for some of what's going on in the use of data and analytics and marketing. In so doing, introduce myself. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DataXu. And DataXu is a company that is using tools from EMC, among other companies, to collect information about consumer behavior in the digital lifestyle, and to use this to improve the effectiveness of marketing, as well as sort of the strategic insights into what's going on with consumers in this digital world. So our sort of starting point as we think about this topic is just what I call the digital lifestyle, which is now somewhat obvious to us. We need look no further than ourselves or our spouses or children to just see how much time we're spending on always on connected devices. And this is really what's creating all of this data, which is really a new commodity that we're all trying to figure out. This is not the name Mike Baker and my email address or something. It's my behavioral information, how I'm using mobile apps, when I'm using or consuming video. And it's really sort of setting up a new paradigm in the world of marketing. And so many are sort of trying to figure this out. The information that's created, can it be used to glean insights about consumer behavior as we see people's behavior really changing fundamentally, enabled by digital devices, whether you want to call that ubiquitous computing or the mobile revolution. It's all sort of part of the same spectrum. And I and others have observed, it's almost like when you're digitally, as a brand, if you're a big brand marketer, your operation of a website or a mobile application or even ads, there are all these sort of touch points that are creating data events. And in a certain way, your investment in trying to engage people, whether it's Facebook or Google or what have you, is creating information about what people like to engage with. Well, what kind of message, when, where, why? And so advertising is really becoming research in a certain way. In the midst of this, we're seeing sort of the old-fashioned business of advertising, Mad Men, transforming into sort of data mavens. It's gender neutral. It's not just men. But it's going from this world of sort of like TV, radio, and print, manual ways of working, lots of middlemen, no data, batch mode decisions, static information, storytelling in the absence of information, into this like very different place where there's all these new channels where this unstructured data is coming out of, things are happening programmatically. There are APIs where we're automating the buying and selling of attention time. The middlemen are dropping away, as the internet seems to do to all middlemen. The data is becoming overwhelming. It's gone from an opportunity to a problem, and it's becoming dynamic. It's changing all the time. This is really much more of a scientific environment. The creative that has characterized marketing primarily is now starting to really be balanced with science too. And I don't think, neither I nor others would say science is ruling the day, but it's clearly now a new balancing, a new refactoring of this business. And to just illustrate this, I'd like to show an animation that proves the point. This is a 3D heat map of consumer behavior after these consumers have been exposed to advertisements from a large automaker, showing you these consumers around the US, showing you different models of cars, and where this heat map is flaring red or cratering into blue, is showing you where consumer behavior has been affected by advertising. What's so interesting about watching this heat map, which is kind of hypnotic, is how dynamic it is, by time of day, by place, by model. So this is actually how people behave and how they live their lives. Well, now, what's causing this? Well, good question. Friends are causing it, as they mention a brand. TV commercials are causing it. Online advertising and other things are causing it. But we now have the ability to measure this stuff in real time. And as we do, we also have the ability to try to influence it. So it's kind of reinventing the business of marketing around data and analytics. So here's a really interesting point is, traditionally we collect information, we make data models and algorithms that then predict, at first they explain things and now they predict things. But how do you deal with what I just showed, which is this incredibly dynamic consumer behavior, the speed of life? Can we even make decisions at the speed of life? So where are we going with all this big data stuff? Well, here I want to talk about advertising for a second, the evolution of digital advertising, and suggest to you that what we're seeing in this industry with the advent of APIs and programmatic ways of transacting is actually something we're going to see across industries. So once upon a time, way back in 1996, there were these publishers that sold ads. They had direct sales reps. Some in the room may even have been involved in that. I'm not looking at you, Joelle. You came later because you're not that old. And in 1998, we saw ad networks who said, I can represent like 10 sites or 20 or 30 because it's kind of a pain to have to deal with a selling rep from each one. So it's kind of aggregation. Okay, that makes sense. Then in 2000, somebody said, well, wait a sec. What if you had a bunch of ad networks and put them on one exchange? You could aggregate all the supply and all the demand, and it would be even more efficient. And then Google did something, as they do, that sort of really created a milestone. And they said, we're going to create a huge ad exchange. We're going to try to reach as much of the internet as we can. And it will work in real time. And you'll be able to auction off each individual impression, right now at 7 p.m. In Boston, my browser, that placement can be auctioned off. And that gave rise to technologies like DataXu, my company, that said, well, how is a buyer going to figure out what to pay or what message? That's crazy. You're going to have to bid manage in real time what somebody's attention is worth. And then we saw this whole phenomena go to mobile, which is interesting. Local companies like NextAge, which is a mobile ad exchange, growing very quickly, or even video, Brightroll and these other companies. And we're now kind of seeing the concept of digital marketing management platforms that are taking the analytics, taking the programmatic bid management, and putting it all together. And what's really going on, and here, we wanted to give a perspective on the IT, is back in the 1990s, we had a data warehouse, or a database, I should say, and we stuffed information in it, and we made a decision by querying it with a business analyst. It was a big decision, change the supply contract. We found a more efficient suppliers. We looked granularly through this information. It was old data, and it was one decision, big impact. We then saw about 10 years ago the idea of things like business rules and rule-based triggers, where I'm going to collect more information, it'll be more fresh, and I will be able to make more decisions quickly. The decisions actually diminished in their individual importance, but the value sort of went up to the enterprise because you can make more relatively mundane decisions. And really what we're seeing today at companies like DataXu, and I think others outside of marketing as well, is the decision rate's going crazy. Like a company like ours makes 500 million decisions a second. The data freshness is milliseconds, but these are micro decisions. And so, it's not far-fetched to suggest that, this is the way energy will be managed. The lights in buildings, the heat, there'll be sensors that measure things that come back and create data models that then are trying to optimize a system that then the sensors are measuring. How did we do? And the whole thing sort of loops. So this is this idea of like real-time decisions. And what's interesting about marketing, to talk about data, is we are at the forefront in marketing of this new information architecture. Why? Because everything's digital. So the inputs and the outputs, you don't have to worry about these things. You don't have to worry about deploying all the sensors. The sensors are us using these connected devices. And what's really cool is you can start to learn a lot of things about people without asking them anything. You can learn, for instance, on people who come to your website but don't buy things. These blocks here, by the way, you see the dark block is people who are very engaged buying things. The light ones are not buying things. You can start to describe them by size of block. Most people who are buying things have between $50,000 and $75,000 of household income. Also over 100K. They're mainly female, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really sort of earth-shaking. All of these insights about consumers without doing a poll, without doing a survey, without doing any research, just through log file data of a website. And you can start to sort of dig deeper. I mean, the internet industry right now, Google runs on clicks. How much for a click? Well, a click is not a sale. So it turns out when you actually start to look at who clicks, as you look at data, you realize, well, the people with the lowest income actually are the people who click on ads. Look at the people with the highest income. They don't click, right, Tom? How many ads do you click on? But
no comment.
Let's look over here.
Is that predictive of income if you don't click on very many things?
You can see the correlation. Yeah. This is somebody who's looking, but who actually takes actions on my website that are valuable? Well, it's actually, this happens to be a platinum card, for a credit card company. It's the people with a lot of money, not surprisingly. So there's an inverse correlation to the thing I've been measuring and optimizing on and my lifetime value of my customers. Marketing's getting smart. It really hasn't been that smart before, but now big data is getting it smart. And I'm going to just, with that, sort of close the prepared remarks. And this is all meant to provoke thoughts and to get Chuck in his fully unvarnished state. In terms of
wouldn't even take that much to get Chuck going, in my experience.
In terms of time, I'm going to come over here and we're going to have a conversation. But so Chuck, you work with EMC. It'd be easy for us to talk about the technologies behind this, and I think that's probably a good starting point. I don't want that to be an ending point, but tell us, what's basically involved in running a data-driven.
Well, a couple things. I think like we were talking before, we look at the adoption patterns. Everybody kind of sees this stuff, but who's actually doing it, right? So a couple things, and I think we talked about it. One is incredibly competitive industries, right? The more you're dog eat dog to get that next customer, the more you're interested in this stuff.
So what are those industries? What are you
Packaged goods, telecommunications, interestingly enough, not healthcare.
Financial services.
Financial services, credit cards, that sort of thing. So if you work in a competitive industry, you're very interested in this stuff. The second is we're always looking for an empowered business leader who owns a critical business process. Very often that's in the marketing organization, which is why we're having a marketing discussion. But they're saying, hey, I want to take this brass ring and go do it. Just to be clear, what we're talking about here is not only a marketing discussion, it could be a finance discussion, a manufacturing discussion, any business process. But 9 out of 10 times, it's the marketing guys who want to get all over this stuff. And the third thing is they're willing to invest. Not in a classic ROI sense, I put the money in, here's what I expect to get out, but I see myself putting a lot of chips on the table, and this looks cool, and I'm going to give it a try and see what I get from it. So the consumption pattern is more in terms of experimentation as opposed to a big cast iron project. Now we shift around to the technology side, it's all about making it easy to consume. How many of you guys work in traditional enterprises with traditional IT groups? Anybody here? Okay. Easy to consume technology is probably not their forte. You probably have a better IT environment at home than you do at the office, right? So I get to see both sides of it. I see the business people who are trying to create these new capabilities and these IT organizations that go, Hadoop? What's that? You know? And they were built and funded in a way to deliver predictable services that run the business as opposed to experimentation with data, which is what everybody wants to do. So this is kind of playing out some interesting ways. In some cases, strong marketing leader says, hey, I'm going to create my own little IT group. I'm going to hire IT guys. I'm going to buy big parallel architectures and great technology and go do it. Typically frowned upon by the powers that be, but some people leave the reservation. Much more often is to get into it by consuming it as an external service. I'm going to expose myself to what this stuff is. I'm going to teach my people how to use it. And when I get enough familiarity with the value that it brings to the business, I can make a better case to the powers that be to bring in technology.
Can I stop you there? Mm-hmm. So I know Tom has opinions on this, but how getting into the water here, you can imagine we'd be tempted to work with a company who brings sort of software and expertise.
And resources, so you don't have to go buy a 1,000-node Hadoop cluster to get started. But yeah.
So is that what you're seeing?
Yes, absolutely.
Because here we could just stop and say, is there a tools market? You're selling tools in a way.
And by the way, there's some people at the very high end here who say, we're all in, we get this, we have a funding pattern, we're out and going to spend $10 to $50 million to go build this stuff, and I as a technology vendor, I'm glad to take checks all day long. But if you look at how they got there, they didn't start there. They started somewhere else and developed the organizational appetite for predictive analytics, and then made the case for building the pyramids or whatever they want to go do. Mm-hmm. So, understanding DataXu's business and other businesses, that is the preferred consumption model to get people going. The tools, the expertise, the familiarity about how hard it is to take predictive analytics, put it in front of a bunch of business people that don't believe you, and actually get the actions to result from the predictive behaviors.
Well, and always, I think that the tools are no offense to your chosen employer, but they're the easiest part in a way. You can write a check for them. You can't write a check to engender management enthusiasm or to build the expertise that you need.
Okay, I would agree with that. So I guess
there's who's it Gartner who says that by 2017 the CMO will spend more on IT than the IT department. Do you buy that? Yes. Really?
Maybe.
What?
I would say influence. They're having the influence, and now they're getting the technical expertise to be able to adjust.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, you're going to spend a bunch of money on stuff. Who's going to get it? Is it going to be an external service provider, or is it going to be an IT organization? Go to some of these born digital companies. I'll use LinkedIn as an example. 400 data scientists, big farm. They have decided to invest in their own expertise to go do that. Most of us don't work for companies that were born digital, and we're not funded to go do this. So I think it's going to be external services, external expertise, external tools to get you up the proficiency curve. But Tom, I'd like to bring you into the discussion here. Having a crystal ball is one thing. Getting people to act on it is another thing entirely. Has anybody had that experience yet where you've come up with this great insight and you sit in this meeting and everybody goes, huh?
And I think a lot of the big data action is that the earliest Hadoop adopters were online companies, which live and breathe this stuff every day, and startups in other areas. In Boston, lots in healthcare. They may not buy a lot of your big equipment yet, but now I think we're starting to see, maybe led by marketing in many cases, large companies, big companies getting interested in big data, and I think they need some help. They need help figuring out what to do first. They need some help with what capabilities to build. They need some help with how they relate to everybody else in their industry. And I think that might, once they start to see there are other people in your industry who are doing this quite aggressively, it starts to drive action pretty quickly, I'd say.
But the one thing that none of us could bring to the table on your behalf is strong leadership, right? The tools are there, the expertise is there, and this is what I typically go, because I deal with hundreds of customers and they say they want to go do this stuff. I say, who's the guy or gal who's going to put their neck out to say, I'm going to spend a bunch of money on stuff that looks like voodoo to most people just because. And that's a very rare personality. I see some head shaking in the room.
So is that where we are right now with this stuff? Sort of needing to sort of take a leap into the dark.
For those who are familiar with it, there's light, but that little pool of light is surrounded by a lot of darkness.
Right. Well, do you? Maybe it's a question even for the audience, but I mean, do people worry about? You were doing social as an evangelist. And so you always have to ask that question. These new things that are very consumer driven, do they wind up making sense? In a sort of budgeting sense for a corporation.
I was just saying, it reminds me an awful lot of like 1997, 98, when there was a big rush to embrace e-commerce by the established businesses that saw the born digital firms, right, that were doing that.
Well, they were feeling disrupted.
They were feeling disrupted.
It was an insurance policy, if nothing else, as opposed to
But they were chasing it with money, if not necessarily overriding, a profound understanding, but they were chasing it with money and technology. But now I feel like there's this roadmap too that you can look at, and you can look at the algorithmic trading guys and say, okay, how many people trade the way Peter Lynch described 20 years ago? Almost zero. Yeah. Almost zero in terms of volume on Wall Street.
The same number of advertisers who act the same way Don Draper did 20 or 30 years ago.
So
we're headed there.
I'll give you an example. We're going through this in our own organization. So EMC, down the road, big company, traditional marketing squared. 20 years of print ads. And
you say square or squared?
Very traditional, old school, right? This is how we've always done it. This is how we always will do it. New CMO comes in, Jeremy Burton. He sees it as his role as change agent to get us into a digital business model as far as marketing. Massive investment in extending the social communities and everything and our engagement points. Digital apps and mobile apps just to create data that we can feed, but creating a whole proficiency center around ingesting data, providing analytical models, and driving decisions. That did not happen organically. A bunch of people at the director level didn't sit around in a room and say, golly gee whiz, wouldn't this be a great idea to do predictive analytics on consumer behavior? And I see this pattern not only in our own organization, but in every organization that I see, is that you can point to the person who wants to go drive this.
And it's a new person in almost every case.
They haven't been there 20 years.
It's not, and this was true with more traditional analytics as well. There were precious few midnight conversions. Oh, I should have been more analytical all these years.
Right.
It's more new executive coming in, CMO in the case that we're talking about now, CEO in the case of traditional analytical competitors, which is unfortunate. You think more people could kind of get that idea and transition with it, but it just doesn't seem to happen.
So I'll give you an example of some of the things we're going through right now. So we now have our crystal ball. It is creating amazing predictive powers on consumers. And we go to these meetings, and on one side of the room are the people with a great data model and this great predictive insight, and on the other side of the table are a bunch of people who don't understand what all this voodoo is about. And I think I was joking with you before, we call this the 3 phases of data denial. 1 is your data sucks, 2 is your model sucks, and if that doesn't work, you suck. And you can actually time it, okay, we're getting past the methodology attack, here come the personal attacks.
You're actually describing our everyday at DataXu.
Yeah. And I've seen this pattern enough, not only in my own company, but in the customer companies that I work for, is that there is a new way of decisioning. And if you've built up 15, 20 years of gut, all of a sudden you realize your gut may not be as good as this predictive model that somebody has shown you, and that is very disconcerting to people who are well advanced in their career. Mind if I pivot a bit about this?
Sure.
So we get involved a lot with data science and data scientists. This is outside of marketing. This is any pursuit you want.
Can you just define what is a data scientist? And Tom could talk about that from his recent HBR article.
It's kind of this made-up individual that's actually becoming quite formal, but typically they have a strong mathematical background plus a lot of different interests. They apply the scientific method.
Can we? I want to pause. Like, what was their undergraduate degree? And you said data scientists are sexy.
Sexiest job of the not
job.
personally sexy.
I would call them sexy.
Yeah.
They're not great at parties. They're not great at parties.
Yeah, they don't get many wolf whistles, I don't think. But science, and I mean not just undergrad, but all the way through PhD in many cases. Experimental physicist is probably the modal category because they fool around with apparatus and they gather data and they have a very creative approach to figuring out the world, and
Curious, right?
and they're mathematical and statistical, and so there are probably more of those backgrounds in data science than any other, but a lot of computational biologists, systems biologists, very strong kind of computational and science mix.
So anyway, this is the hot career, and I think you've written about it, and I've written about it. So if you've got kids going through college, data science is good. Not great at parties, but you'll drive a nice car.
So you're saying my seventh graders should spend more time in algebra too?
All the stat classes that we all kind of ignored, pay attention. So anyway, we have these very highly trained professionals that are incredibly much in demand, and we're in the business of applying data science professionals to go work on business problems. And our first thinking is, well, you need a domain expert. So the healthcare guy to the healthcare problems, and the marketing guy to the marketing problem, et cetera, et cetera. And we learned very quickly that these people had developed perceptual biases. So we've gone to a two-in-the-box methodology where we have one person that has a secret handshake and says all the buzzwords the customer wants to hear, and some guy who has no idea what he's getting into. Guess who always seems to come up with a better predictive model? The person with absolutely no background in the domain. And I think your example of Paramount...
Why is that, though?
Well, why did the Paramount people decide that your data was useless? Because they had a preformed notion of how the world worked, developed by 20 years of expertise, validated by them moving up in the organization and making more money, and here you were coming with a predictive model that invalidated their career path.
And not that it's that great. The expertise in general isn't that great because I think 6% of Hollywood films make money. Yeah. So you'd think with that low a batting average that they would be open to
listening to the data a little bit more.
Yeah. So just to kind of finish the thought out, it's very interesting to watch this perceptual bias get in the way of our ability to use predictive analytics in marketing or in any other domain. So as you do this, your expertise may not be your best friend. Let the data speak, let the data talk.
Let's shift gears to talk about actually a question. Yeah.
If anyone has seen Moneyball, all you have to do is look at all the scouts around the table and the number
classic.
sitting there and saying, well, you need more runs and this is how you get them.
I've been in meetings like that, but I think we've built a whole, and you wrote about this earlier, Tom, we've built a whole management culture around decision making based on experience. And now we're shifting one to decision-making based on math and analytical models.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more about that. So you're a teacher, Tom. I mean, I'm curious. I've read, according to McKinsey, we have 140,000 too few quantitative people right now in the economy. And I'm sure that number's doubling.
And 1.4 million too few data savvy managers, right?
Right.
That's the other
right.
number.
So how let's talk about that a little bit. At the end of the day, once you've implemented the tools and sort of embraced some of these ways of working, what's at the other end is a new way of managing that is a little bit different than the old way. So how does that change occur, and what even is the right career path? I mean, for people just listening, what advice would you give?
Well, it's you're not going to get much today from business schools, I'm afraid.
And then Harvard has some program, like, is it a master's in data?
They're starting a master's. That's in the engineering and applied sciences
So
area.
not in the management school.
Not in the business school yet. Same at MIT. Same at almost every business school. In this report that I did for DataXu, I interviewed a guy named Bill Pierce, who was a chief marketing officer at Del Monte, a variety of other places. He's now working with the Berkeley Business School to set up a program in sort of data-driven marketing. So I think there is hope, but if you're doing it today, you've got to kind of plan your own career, which is your own curriculum.
Kind of like the web in 1995.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's no place you really go to learn this stuff. You're going to have to teach yourself.
And the data scientists, I mean, you know, on Wall Street, 10 or 15 years ago, you had to get a physics PhD and sort of teach them about finance. Now there are probably 100 masters of financial engineering programs. So I think we'll have that, but it's kind of, academic institutions are not the fastest to adapt to the world, I would say.
So is your answer, you know, go work in an environment where there's a willingness to take the risks, where you can go learn it.
Yeah,
and that's essentially how you're going to gain the skills to become a manager in this area.
Yeah, that and as much quantitative training as you can get in school is a good idea. And I do always say, you know, if your CEO, your CMO hasn't sort of gotten it yet, don't spend too much time trying to persuade them. Just go find a job at an organization where they already get it.
There's those who get it and those who don't, and
yeah.
trying to convert those that don't is rather difficult.
I just wanted to pause to make sure if any questions, just raise your hand and we'll cover them as we go. I'd love to hear more from you, Tom, in terms of you've thought a lot about, okay, this is a big idea, change ways of working. Like how does an organization, a marketer, for instance, actually sort of get going? What are the steps?
Well, yeah, they're right in here, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, I won't go into great detail about it because you can read them. But the first one is get some sense of the terrain. You know, do some sort of assessment of what are the key types of marketing decisions you have to make. What are your existing capabilities? What data do you have available? You can do it yourself. Get a consultant to do it. That is relatively easy if you're willing to spend the money. Although you'll probably be depressed by the outcome. I think it's fair to say. Step 2 is to start thinking about how you make money. How do you make sales off of this stuff? So Michael's organization knows a lot about this issue, but attribution models, I think, are critical to organizations understanding how are they making the sale on the basis of their advertising. And if you're just doing last click, you're probably not going to be very successful in thinking about, you know, how your investment translates into results. Step 3 is to start to think in a kind of, let's just say, non-hypothesis-driven way about this stuff. The phrase here is begin to leverage insights and algorithmic optimization for improved in-market performance. What that basically says is you have to make a lot of decisions with digital media very quickly. What did you say, 5 million a
500 million a
second? 500
second.
million
Yeah.
a second. Most organizations aren't quite at that level, but the old idea of, you know, well, let's kind of study it for a while and let's do a model that explains, it has a good fit with the data, and then we'll start to predict with it and so on. It's a 6-month process historically. You know, you need to get into machine learning and AI and tools that sort of do this on a very rapid basis. If you don't have that capability internally, which most don't, you know, organizations like DataXu do, then it doesn't make any sense to do this by, you know, for each channel separately. The world it's a multi-channel, omni-channel world we live in, and so start thinking about how can I put all that data together in some sort of, you know, customer data warehouse. And then finally, do something and learn. This is a kind of test and learn kind of world. Start doing this for a while. You'll find out some things that you didn't expect. You know, if advertising is research, then advertising is all about learning from that research. So start to put some programs in place and see what you find out. You're not going to be right the first time.
I guess it's the willingness to learn and experiment and grow.
Right? And admit your mistakes. I mean, I think that is the key aspect of the culture for a lot of organizations. If you can't admit mistakes, then you can't ever experiment.
So you've been studying analytics for a while, writing about books like Competing on Analytics, which is a great sort of seminal piece of thinking in the area. I mean, would you have given the same advice 5 or 10 years ago about what to do? I mean, what's different about this?
Well, I've been urging people to think in a multi-channel way for a while. It hasn't seemed to have a whole lot of effect yet, but
It worked on us.
Yeah, but the thing that I have changed my mind about, and in part it was from talking to you guys, is I was a little bit distrustful of the whole kind of machine learning, black box, AI-ish sort of thing, because I felt like if there wasn't somebody to sort of advocate, the person who came up with a hypothesis to advocate for that decision with a decision maker, it just wouldn't really happen. But clearly at the scale of data and decisions that we're talking about, that just doesn't make any sense anymore. So, it may in some cases, but figuring out what digital ads to run, it makes zero sense. So in that way, I've really changed my mind.
So just to kind of follow on that, we're now in about our third phase of doing digital marketing. And the rationale for doing things has completely changed. So how many people here work for companies that want to push out mobile apps to their customers, right? Typically, the rationale is better user experience, better engagement. The rationale for us has changed because, yeah, we want to do that, but boy, what a rich data feed we're getting off the clicks and the interaction in that. So the ROI for the mobile app has now shifted from, oh, we'd like to have better engagement to, wow, what a rich data feed we now get. Same thing has happened in our community environment. We run a B2B community of about 500,000 IT professionals. 1.0 was, hey, we're doing this to collaborate and engage and stuff. 2.0 is, wow, look at this rich data feed we're getting, how people are interacting with this stuff. So one of the things I've noticed for kind of our progression is that an appetite for data always begets an appetite for more data. And that appetite for more data drives investment patterns and stuff that you're still doing maybe some of the same things, but the whole rationale has now changed to data gathering as opposed to traditional marketing things, because data becomes the fuel for marketing decisioning, and that's what you're spending money on as opposed to what you might have done before.
Chuck said something else that's kind of interesting, which is they're a B2B company, yet you're starting to track data on consumers, basically individuals. And I talk to more and more B2B companies who say, it doesn't feel so B2B anymore. It's individuals who end up making purchase decisions, even in B2B.
They're key influencers. They're key influencers. And again, one person who's working for you in a B2B environment, you can find that connector, you can find that influencer. That's where you send all your love and all of your attention. And
well, you can also start to sort of have an audience of, I want to reach the 5,000
people
C-level decision makers, where and when they are across
or in
the
our
digital
business,
lifestyle.
Right, or 5,000 Uber geeks who seem to influence the other 500,000.
Right.
And again, we now have data of who those people are, their preferences, and we can target our influence marketing on a much smaller audience as opposed to that. So are we spending more on marketing? Yes. Are we getting 10 times more efficiency from that spend? Now it's this virtuous cycle because we now can measure the accuracy of what we're doing. There's a willingness on the part of the business to invest more in marketing.
It's hard to know if it's 10 times more because in the past you had no idea. You threw this stuff out there and hoped that the world would
I used to call it spray and pray,
Yeah.
Gee, that ad looks nice. I wonder if anybody saw it.
Yeah.
So let me, I've got two philosophical questions I wanted to ask, just to kind of open it up a little bit. The first is, maybe for you, Chuck. I mean, some people have said, we're so obsessed on data now. This may be the instinctive thinkers that we run the risk of having really myopia by just sort of looking at the data we can see. So whatever feeds or data sources are coming at me, I'm going to optimize and model those. Yeah. But in so doing, we're actually sort of implicitly deciding that what I don't know doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. How do you think?
Natural human tendency, I only have 10 data points. Let's see if I can create an extrapolative model off those 10 data points. And it's something about human nature. The good analytics professionals, the good data science professionals resist that. It's well known in the industry that let the data speak, and if you don't have enough good data, don't make a decision on it.
I mean, does it actually sort of point to a way of working where my job is to sort of opportunistically test the periphery and just actually do some things that I don't think are right, only to confirm?
Well, I think there's two angles to that. One is the data sets, as you're talking about, but the also is the intellectual capital. So we were talking earlier about Kaggle. Is anybody familiar with Kaggle? Basically, they make data science a team sport. You as a business have an interesting business problem, you post data sets, you benchmark, and you open it up to 55,000 data science professionals around the world. May the best man or woman win. And typically it is someone with no background in the domain. And it's also very nice for pay for results. It's a very interesting business model. Tom, you're familiar with it as well. And we can we can, as professionals in this thing, do what you're suggesting, but another way of compensating that is, well, let me get an outside opinion. If you're looking at major surgery, you'd probably want to talk to another doctor. If you're looking at major decisioning, you probably wouldn't want to talk to somebody outside your field. And I think we're seeing more mechanisms where you not only can bring in more sources of data, but more perspectives on modeling and how to do it. I am absolutely convinced that the more you work with this stuff, the more you get into perspective bias. You tend to look for data sets that reinforce your own view of the world. And I think that's what we have to overcome as individuals.
There's another aspect to that, Michael, which is that we've gotten so good at incremental improvement through analytics. Typically, I'm thinking of A/B testing on websites and multivariate testing and so on. And we don't really think about, well, is that the best we can do? It's a little bit better, so that's enough to adopt that particular version. But I think some of the companies that do a lot of that, I've talked to Google and eBay about it, and they're starting to say, yeah, we realize we got to break out of that incremental improvement mindset.
That order of magnitude thing.
Yeah, and get humans involved again and say, what could we be doing that's radically different?
Right.
By the way, humans who haven't been working at the coalface for the last 3 years on those incremental improvements, right?
Interesting. All right, so my other philosophical question is, no discussion of data when it talks about marketing would be complete without some perspective on privacy. And so we were talking
that creepy
earlier.
factor?
The creepy factor.
How many people have had those ads that follow you around to every website you go to?
Chuck, the shoes that follow you, right? In fact, I had just talked to a browser maker the other day who said we want to introduce a module in the browser that allows people to just say, now that I'm getting interest-based ads, can I just kind of set my interest and change them?
Yeah.
I thought it's a really interesting idea. I don't know that people will frankly care enough to do that, but
or at least make the annoying stuff go away.
Yeah, filter out the annoying.
Yeah, I was shopping for pet food one day, and now I have pet food ads following me wherever I go.
Well, and I have a friend who's single who, on purpose, goes to the Victoria's Secret catalog pages just so he can keep seeing the models around his internet user experience.
And somewhere there's somebody paying for that experience.
Yeah, exactly. So, but my question is,
the creepy factor.
The creepy factor. Yeah. Well, but it's sort of like, what is the creepy factor, and is it this kind of hard line, or is it actually sort of like moving on us as a society?
Pretty rapid.
And I'd love to hear people's perspective in the audience as well.
I'll give you 2 quick thoughts. One is the people who are proficient at this stuff usually has to establish some governance outside of it. If you think about it, you're mixing charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter together. Individually, they're fine. Together, they can go bang. And we want to encourage that kind of experimentation. But at the same time, we all get so excited about what we've discovered about somebody's secret inner thoughts, you can very easily cross the line in some ways. So most of these folks have some lightweight governance, just saying, have you really thought about what you're doing here? The second thing, and I agree with you, is that the lines tend to be moving fast. There was a study, have anybody been to London recently and seen all the cameras everywhere, video wherever you go? They have more cameras per square kilometer than probably any other city in the world. When they first were installed, people were completely creeped out. And then there was about
Isn't
a year.
that an Oracle case study, by the way?
Yeah, right, yeah.
I think it is. Yeah.
And in about a year and a half, people just realized they were there, and they were there for a reason. They were there for everybody's good. So to your point, I think we kind of have to manage that boundary. How far do we want to get inside our consumers' heads without creeping them out, to give them time to adapt to what we're doing, right? Now, I happen to have a public email. You wouldn't believe the unmitigated B2B spam that I get in a day. I've actually had to abandon my corporate email account and have somebody filter it for me just to wean out the few valid communications. I, for one, would like somebody to do some better targeting about who I am, what I want.
Yeah, so whenever it comes to any, I don't know, I see the world a lot in a predator-prey relationship, and marketing works the same way, right?
No.
Every time there's a new twist on how to do something, it's great until everybody starts doing it, and then you make the marketing targets feel like prey, and they rise up and come up with do not call lists, or other things, and then you come up with a new way to get to them, and then they come up with a new way to stop it. And we start having mini drones, and the sporting goods industry will go through the roof because tennis racket sales will go up. and so, but what you're saying is essentially that the reasonable search and seizure, so 1984 actually wasn't that far off, because you're going to get to the point where someone being secure in their personal papers is not going to be reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I see that. By the way, did you know, I mean,
having a module that can see you everywhere in your room, that's going to be...
I don't know if you saw this, the UK government, it's kind of nice to live in the US for this reason. They announced, it was like 4 or 5 months ago, by the way, we're monitoring everything. Like, they just kind of put out the memo, like your email, your phone calls, we're doing deep packet inspection on everything for the purpose of preventing terrorism.
Whereas the NSA once told me, don't worry, we only monitor half your conversations.
That's good. Are you feeling lucky?
They didn't know which half. They didn't tell me which half.
You fix them by only saying every other word.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Let's go back to the marketing discussion.
Yeah.
I think there's a win for consumers here. I would like to be served up the right content, the right experience, the right time that fits my need.
Sure.
And if you can learn enough about me that I am not continually annoyed by your need to sell me feminine hygiene products or whatever it is that really don't fit my personal needs, I would see that as a consumer, maybe in the long term, not the short term, as a good thing.
Right. The feedback loop on that, though, is that everyone thinks that their product for whatever market they think is the appropriate market for them.
So the problem is us. Is that what you're saying? The problem is us as marketers.
It's people think that that whoever they think is their target demographic is the right demographic, so it's not bothering.
Classic line.
And then you get into the issue of, I'm sure you know about the target.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, you had a point.
they were accurate.
Yeah. Yes, right. They were right. It didn't creep everybody out, but they were right. Yeah.
Building on this, isn't it really a case where we have to flip things almost to the way the European model was several years ago, right? When e-commerce first became a big issue, one of the issues that had to be confronted was the notion that if I bought a toaster at Sears here, the fact that I bought that toaster at Sears, the Natick Mall, was information that Sears owned. If I had done that same transaction at the German equivalent in Germany, that wasn't the case, right? There was a different standard. Who owns the data? The consumer owned it in Europe. Here, the store owned it. But now we're shifting to a mode where those boundaries don't exist.
No, that's normalizing.
Also, by the way, there is a constitutional element to this. In the U.S., business has a commercial speech right. And the Supreme Court, in a case in Vermont, actually said business has the right to collect information, a constitutional medium scrutiny right to collect data. So we have a very different normative standard that's actually codified in our Constitution in favor of businesses. The one thing I was going to say just on the advertising, I do believe that what's emerging as the marketing gets smarter, you're going to see the advertising business shrink because people are just going to stop wasting money.
TV specialized stations.
Yeah.
Or narrowcasting or event casting.
It's just, so much of it's wasted. The simple efficiency gains are just to do the stuff that's like, I'll never buy a truck. I just never will. Like, if Ford would just understand that, they'd stop advertising to me as the media becomes addressable. It's just a waste of money. It's not really annoying, it's just irrelevant. So
they think you might change your mind, though,
well,
as you see the right ad.
Yeah, no, they might. The right picture of the truck. Going down the ski slopes, maybe, right? Okay. But my point is, there's never been a better alignment of interest actually between consumers and advertisers because it turns out that irrelevant ads, or even we're going to try to change Mike's opinion. We're going to try. You're just going to waste more and more money. Now, maybe it comes in, but you should analytically understand. That's a long shot. I'm not going to invest in that. Yeah. It's not worth it. So an irrelevant ad is a waste of money for the advertiser, and it's annoying for the consumer. So I think I'm an optimist on this. There's no reason for an advertiser to piss off a consumer for its product.
Yes.
It's a waste of money.
Do you think that we'll get to the point in data collection where you'll be able to do epidemiology and see the negative effects? Like you keep pinging Mike, and then he starts talking.
We got that in our business today.
Do you?
We get enough feedback, and I was just about to mention, we've now are having these come to Jesus things with these marketing groups. It's like, why are you spending $30 million to go annoy your customers, right? You're supposed to make them want it. And one of the data sets that we show is the negative feedback and the responses, and they come in if you have the sensors there. And what? They're annoyed by my message and my product? Yes.
We have data on this from a pizza, a frozen pizza maker. I won't say their name because the camera's on. we ran their advertising for, and the optimization was sentiment shift. We want to see people who are more favorable, more aware of this frozen pizza. When we looked at the creative message that the agency gave us, it's like, this looks like Darth Vader. It's just this black, like, menacing helmet. And we're like, what does this have to do with pizza? Or the people, typically would buy this pizza is the moms who go into the frozen food aisle. That's their target. We just kind of laughed. We ran it. We did A/B test, exposed control, surveys over, brand equity went down. And we also just looked at each other and said, uh-oh, they're going to be pretty pissed off when they see this. Like, your data's wrong, you're wrong, And then we said, well, what we could tell them is the ad itself was that bad. And it's like, well, that's going to get somebody fired.
Yeah.
So we just kind of, right, we showed up and said, didn't work. And that was the last we heard of it, right?
But
what we, of course, said to ourselves is, your brand equity went down with this ad. And so your point's a good one. You can learn when you're creating negative equity.
But even to the point, when I said epidemiology, the fact that if you're annoying people, that...
What's the viral effect?
Right, they become cores of bad blood.
Yeah.
So it's not just that.
Actually, we're now at the point,
detractors.
we can detect when we piss somebody off how they're influencing their neighbors around it. And there's an interesting data set to show people.
Yeah, does it have more leverage?
In Boston and Chicago.
It's more viral than a positive.
Well, Twitter's a classic example. One negative thing gets retweeted 400 times, right?
Maybe one last question before we wrap.
You had a question?
I was just going to contribute that being bombarded with ads and having that end, are we exchanging that for being, the discomfort of being monitored all the time? So it's
an interesting trade, isn't it?
It's one that we feel like we have no choice.
Well, the same argument is showing up in healthcare right now in healthcare delivery. To the extent that you expose everything about you, your genetics, your lifestyle, et cetera. I mean, we were talking about just everything. Your doctor can use predictive models to give you better health care. None of us like exposing all those things we hate putting on insurance forms. This is way beyond that. So it's kind of this interesting trade that you make that says in exchange for better health care treatment, you're going to have to get naked, right? And I don't know how much of that is going to really apply to what we do in marketing, but it is starting to show up in other industries as well. And some people go for it. And other times they say, no thanks. Auto insurance is having a real tough time with these little sensors.
The black boxes.
The black boxes. If that was a great idea, they're not getting the uptake they thought, right? So again, we're still experimenting with a lot of this. Do you want to share your data in exchange for a benefit? I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. All I know is that there doesn't seem to be an answer. Right?
But there are boundaries, right? In that scenario you described, that total transparency, there's a clear and obvious connection between the transparency and communication between the patient and the doctor, but there's also an expectation that that data stays between the patient and the doctor, not the doctor then goes to tell the local grocery store, hey, don't sell my patient.
No, but what about the drug companies? What about the drug companies? What about the insurance companies? I mean, I've actually tracked this data going back. It goes a lot of places, and everyone's sworn to secrecy. I get it. It's everywhere.
But the irony is data gains value through its dissemination.
Right.
Thank you all for coming by.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you guys. Great session.